Okay, it's the 20th of May 2017. This is our official Skype conference regarding the translators and the cloudbusters for the group. We're going to take multiple questions and we haven't got all the answers, but I'm sure we got pretty well most of them. And we were just mentioning, Sean, you were talking. Just take it away, Sean. You were just talking.
We were talking about what people refer to as chem bombs. Sometimes they refer to them as large volume aerosol plumes. They generally spray these offshore, and I have also noticed sometimes a plane that looks like it's not spraying and it looks like it may be an actual contrail. Well, after that disappears for a while, and just miraculously a whole bunch of nasty looking large clouds appear. Not even cloud formations, just real wispy mess. And they do it a lot off the coast. Even on days in California when we have completely cleared all their chemtrails. No chemtrails are sticking. These large volume aerosol plumes or chem bombs will blow in from the coast. We are still able to clear them, but it takes a lot longer. A lot harder, thicker, nastier stuff.
Yeah, one of the reasons we had a conversation about this, and people were saying, I've deployed, nothing's happening, all the clouds are still there, and it won't move. And Stelios, who was the working partner of Trevor James Constable for like 15 years, he called that glue skies. Basically what it means is if it's taken hold and it's fresh, we know that chemtrails removes massive amounts of moisture potential, and we need, as Trevor said recently, we need something like 12 grams per cubic meter of moisture to start to take effect. Maybe they know that eventually the cloudbuster will always pull the moisture in, even if it takes 3 days. And to prove that, we've had a drought forecast in the UK. We've all been deploying and we've had 5 days of solid rain. Now, they were forecasting drought only a week and a half ago. So that eventually, ether always wins. What you've got to remember is, what you see in the first few hours is no way represents what's going to happen with your deployment. We'd all love to see a change. We'd like to press the button and have blue skies within 30 minutes. Sometimes that does happen. And that's because there's enough moisture and you've got your etheric potential correct. Sorry, Sean, you carry on. Are you there, Sean?
Harry, Sean.
Harry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
You said chemtrails remove large amount of potential from the clouds. What did you say? I just missed that.
Potential to create the moisture.
Ah, okay, yes. It makes sense.
Yeah. Whilst we're on potential, what you've got to remember is, think of 2 tanks of water. If the water is level, you will not have a transfer of water or energy from one tank to the other. When we were at school, they always said that potential is the movement of energy, stored energy, kinetic energy. 30 tons on the end of a rope is potential kinetic energy, or potential energy, not kinetic energy. So, and it's the same with ether. If you've got a positive etheric charge in the atmosphere, so keeping it simple, a positive potential charge of ether in the atmosphere is thunderstorms, lightning, black clouds, heavy winds. The more chaos, the more the ether. So there's 2 ways you can affect that. You can either go below the potential and create a low potential, or you can create a higher potential than that. Either one of them will affect it in 2 opposite ways. Ether runs from what we call a low potential to a high potential. So if you create a low potential, you're going to be feeding that storm. That's what it happens. It's running from your low potential to the etheric high potential. So if you've got a big raging thunderstorm and you deploy it to low potential, that's just a small amount of water, no more water, and just deploy, you'll start to feed it.
No water, low potential deployment is no water.
Yes.
Dry deployment, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, if you had your 18-inch translator, which Trevor James Constable said this in his video, an 18-inch translator, you can stop a typhoon with it if you get the potential correct, and it will generate
so
a
that
high.
Would be
Sorry.
Adding water to help stop.
Constantly spraying
correct?
water. Yeah, just keep spraying water.
And this is a high potential deployment.
Yes. Well, if you're generating a high potential, and you're a higher potential than the storm, the ether of the storm is now classed as a low potential compared to yours. So the energy of the storm is going to be pulled from it.
Yes.
And that's actually how we've stopped Hurricane Matthew, Napartak. I had a conversation with John Stray last night with Karen Baker, and that's true, isn't it, Karen? John was saying he stopped dozens of hurricanes.
Oh yes, yes he did.
Yeah.
A big typhoon in Thailand.
Yep. So much so that typhoon in Thailand, and I've got the link to that, it was one of the biggest mysteries of any typhoon ever to hit Asia. Nobody could explain it. It dropped within hours. A massive typhoon went down to nothing within hours. And we've also done that with Napartak. Gary Lowney, myself and John Stray split it through the middle, and we've got the video on that. Some of you have probably seen that. And that's why we stress to the group, it's not a toy. It's an incredibly powerful piece of kit. And if you deploy it directly into the earth for long enough, you will create an earthquake, because it upsets the water mantle under the table, and earthquakes are very much related to the movement and the agitation of water below the ground.
Hey, Harry, I got a question.
So,
you mentioned that using the device without water, so that would basically mean it would cancel out the classic Cloudbuster, because that uses water and it doesn't have mirrors in it. So you could only use a translator in that situation, right?
Yes, but the same with Willem Reich's Cloudbuster. Once you've started an etheric potential, that etheric potential will continue and continue until you shut down.
Right. But
Or until there's an equalization between the two potentials.
But I'm saying, as far as the water is concerned, you said that not adding water, well, the only way to not add water is if you're using the translators. That uses the mirror technology in it, where the Cloudbuster doesn't have the mirrors in it.
No, that's right. So, but you see, if you started a Willem Reich Cloudbuster up, even if you've got 7 to 10 tubes, it will start to deploy at a low potential. But here's where the translators, I think, have a slight advantage, and that is it's very difficult to create a low potential with a massive piece of equipment. Do you understand what I'm saying? It always deploys almost bordering on a high potential, and the only way you can restrict that is by capping off 5 of your 7 tubes.
Nice.
If you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So Harry, it's Steve. Just to go back one step. So if there's a storm coming in and I want to feed the storm and make it more aggressive, I would deploy a low potential, which is dry. And does that mean I don't actually spray the bullet and spray inside, or I still spray but I don't put it in
Yeah,
water?
the interesting thing about spraying it with water is it starts the etheric charge.
Okay.
And once that's going, you're then in control. But don't keep spraying more water, because you will accelerate the etheric charge more and more and more, until in the end you'll be sucking the storm dry.
Okay. So
Okay, so we always have to spray no matter if we deploy dry or wet, we always have to spray inside the tube. one time?
It's not a hard and fast rule. If you deploy it at the moment you uncap with a translator, it will start to translate.
Okay.
It just accelerates the process if you spray water on it. But
Okay.
if you want a really low potential, don't spray anything. Just deploy.
Okay. When we deploy dry, somebody said to take the bullet off. Is that correct or not?
You can deploy without the bullet end. And when we say bullet, we mean this one. Yeah.
The bullet, the thingy, not the cap, not the black cap, the other one at the other end.
Yeah, so you take this cap off and you place the bullet inside, which is, I'm doing this for viewers, so there's
yes, when you deploy the cap, the black cap always have to come off. But I remember that somebody said when you deploy low potential, dry, we have to take out the bullet as well, or not? That is not the case.
I would actually, if you, well, there's two. You can deploy dry with a bullet end as well.
Okay.
But if you really want a low potential, you would then place the cap back in the bottom with no bullet. The potential, you can deploy that as a low potential with no bullet. The way I designed the bullet is that it will keep the etheric charge going, because there's quite a few pieces of equipment in here. There's some polysilica, there's small fine particles of stainless steel, there's a kyanite blade which helps to stop the DOR actually, and it does work. I know it does.
Okay, so if I want a very low potential, I take the cap off. No, the cap on. I keep the black cap on, but I take out the bullet. Is that correct?
No. If you now, this is completely open both ways. Okay. That's now deploying.
So no cap.
No. Let me finish. This particular one is open at both ends. It's deploying in two directions. Okay. It's deploying in two directions. So what you'd need to do is screw that cap back in there, because inside you've got your other tube with two mirrors facing in opposite directions. And basically the tube that's in this is all that Trevor used to deploy.
Yeah.
Now we've placed this inside a second mirror finished tube, which is now giving it a bit of extra boost, if you like, because you've contained the translator and put it in a total encapsulated atmosphere, if you like, and it can only deploy one of two ways, forward or backwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Harry, can you turn on your video so we can all see, because your screen is black?
No, my video's on.
Can't see you here in Santa Cruz. Maybe we need to shut our cameras off, the rest of us. Sometimes
can nobody see me?
No,
I can see you, Harry.
I can only see the picture.
I can always.
That's
All right. Well, my video was classed as on because I can see my video working.
You maybe just turn it on and off one time.
I was just going to say, yeah.
And then some of the others maybe turn the camera off and go to just your photo, if that's okay. You know, it's fabulous to see everyone. Maybe a couple more.
Okay, so we turn the camera off, yeah?
Well, I can only see Glenn right now. Sean, Lisa are still photos, and Harry's the one moving.
I've switched mine back on.
Some of us shutting down. Thank you. Shutting the cameras down. Thanks, Harry.
See, you can have the videos on as long as you mute your camera, so we can actually see who's on without having to have, multiple conversations that confuses people.
Agreed. Sometimes too many cameras on, I've seen it affect others too. So we can see. Can everyone see Harry now?
I can see Harry.
I can see Harry, yeah.
Right, so it's to do with the transfer of information. It overloads it and it will only let so much information transfer through on video cameras with so many people. Right, so I think Hans is now back with us. Yeah, so we're talking potential, and this is what that's one of the keys to either whether you increase the energy in a storm or you can suck it dry and make it totally dissipate. The other thing is, the unusual thing about deployments is, when you deploy, you form a blockage. And Trevor mentioned that in the video I posted the other day. And that blockage is critical. If you want to stop a hurricane, for example, it will have a rotation. And you would block it on the incoming side. So the rotation that's coming towards you, that's the side you would block it first. And you'd block it at three different heights. And what Stelios did in Southern California, they completely blocked a massive hurricane coming in, because he went right, left, then he went higher up, right and left, and then he went higher still, right and left. And that caused a V shape. There was no way that hurricane could go left or right. It had to follow that blockage right to the point, because it was coming forward. And then you hit it only on the right hand side, it blocks the rotation, and it just totally dissipates. And that's exactly what happened on that occasion. And that was posted on the page to see that one.
So Harry, it's Steve again, talking about potential. So if I wanted to destroy a storm, suck the water out of it, I want to create high potential, which means that I put the bullet in water, basically. I have a small lake on my property. Can I utilize that to my advantage?
Yes, absolutely.
So I put I set the translator up so the end of it is actually in the lake. Can I do that?
Yep, you can put the bottom, if you've got the 18-inch translator, none of the bullet is insulated. And the reason for that is the tube is insulated, and it's insulated with a fast setting clear lacquer, a cellulose base, which is organic, and that's enough to control the etheric charge, because ether runs on the surface, and if ether is running on the surface of this, it will not dissipate sideways because it's been insulated with an organic material. Conversely, the bullet has no insulation on it whatsoever. That means the etheric charge runs all over the surface and will come away from the surface of the bullet. And it means an etheric charge can go into the surface from the water. Now, what we are tapping into is the whole of the etheric charge that's available in the planet itself, because that's the interaction between the Earth and the atmosphere. And what you're doing, you're providing the key to give them contact with each other.
So if I just rest the bullet, I've got a sandy beach that kind of goes down into the water. If I just rest the bottom of the bullet in the sand, in the water,
that will do it.
And it doesn't hurt my lake. There's fish and everything in the lake, so it doesn't hurt that.
No, you'll find it has the opposite effect. It actually enriches all life forms.
So my rainbow trout will become 5-pounders?
They'll be healthier for it, that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Awesome.
I've got people now saying their cabbages are twice the size than what they should be in just a few weeks. That's since they've been deploying translators. And they're noticing there are more insects around the place, more flies. Snails love it because the etheric charge creates a very moist atmosphere. Lisa said today they've got fog. You get high humidity. Rainforests. What do rainforests grow in? High humidity, warm temperatures. Plant life loves it.
So I've only been deploying dry. I mean, obviously that can be one of my issues because I've been doing the opposite that I need to create blue skies, right?
Right. Well, actually what you've been doing, you've been feeding clouds, which means it will help it to rain.
I'll tell you what, the first morning I set up, I was facing west. An hour and 10 minutes after I set up, we had a huge rain and hailstorm. I pointed it right into the dark cloud, so I assume that's what I did.
Yeah, you fed it with a low potential.
Okay. Awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you've done. What William Wright didn't understand is because he didn't have the beauty of radar, I mean, I use as many as 10 different radar sites now. So you can see moisture content, wind direction, temperatures, etheric potential is shown in the moisture potential as well. William Wright didn't have the luxury of that. Now, Trevor James Constable was a radionics expert working with the Royal Navy, and he understood frequencies and he understood weather. And when he deployed, he realised that what William Wright didn't realise is that his cloudbuster was affecting the weather also 3,000 miles away, not just for the local farms he was bringing rains in for. Because rains would come in 2 days later sometimes. So the weather was 2 days away on its way in. And that's when Trevor realised that you can affect the weather for thousands of miles. And we proved that that's the case. What most people cannot get their heads around is the fact you can point 8,000 miles through the planet and affect the weather on the other side of the Earth. And
that's not even that. You said that you can actually hit the sun and it goes off the planet itself onto other planets, right?
It will affect sunspots, yes. You see, sometimes you only need a smallest of switch to switch on the greatest power. And that's what the etheric charge does.
So technically what you're saying is if you point a translator or a cloudbuster up at the sky, that beam, that energy beam, actually can potentially hit alien planets because it just keeps going because it's ether.
Well, it's not an energy beam. It's a quantum. It works quantumly. So if you point in the universe, where you're pointing is affecting it immediately.
So what about direction, Harry?
Direction, well, like Trevor said, and it's true, the etheric flow normally goes from west to east. There's also some that goes from north to south. And the reason for that is I put a video on. I'll come to your direction in a minute, but you need to understand this. Pointing into or with the etheric flow is where you get your massive changes. And you can block it. You can block the jet stream so it actually backs up and backs up. If you kept doing that, what it will do, it will produce droughts further down line because you're stopping the flow of the moisture. So on direction, it's a case of, think of it, you're holding your hand into the wind and blocking it. And that's what you're doing to the etheric charge. If you're pointing into the incoming etheric charge, you're blocking its movement coming in towards you. And if you release and then point the other direction, it will release it. And that's how Trevor created incredible amounts of rain. It was like almost storing the potential up and then releasing it. And that's why, by the way, when you point your translator backwards and you're driving forwards, you're actually releasing and pulling the etheric charge, which means that it's going to rain quicker.
Harry, can you talk about the high pressures and the low pressures? So, for example, California, they always installed high pressures, and that's why they created a man-made drought consistently with the chemtrailing and the NEXRADs.
Yeah.
We had to move those high pressures out and move low pressures in to end the drought.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, high pressure generally means a higher temperature. And what ether does, every time you deploy, it lowers the temperature in the upper atmosphere. Really interesting. And that's why when I spoke to Billy Hayes, he admitted that what we are doing will easily overcome the results that HARP deploys for. In fact, I remember partway through breaking the drought, we discussed the weatherman's report, and they couldn't understand why the rains had come in, because suddenly in the middle of nowhere they had two lows sitting next to each other, which was unheard of. And those two lows counteracted what HARP was trying to do to create a high dry pressure. And that's why we got rains coming in. But I thought that was most interesting, that you don't normally get two cold temperature lows sitting right next to each other independently. But ironically, that's where we were deploying.
And what about the UK and over in Vancouver, where it's a lot of low pressure systems? How are you moving those out of the UK? Is it because you have a lot more translators now?
Well, fortunately, we do get a lot of moisture on the etheric charge from over the Atlantic. I think you're slightly higher than us as far as the equator is concerned. So it depends where the etheric charge goes. The etheric charge is pretty well much focused around the equator, and that's where you'll see most of the moisture as well. But remember, I put a video up. The sun is actually travelling through space at 70,000 miles an hour. So and nose first is the North Pole. So we're not on a flat plane moving through space. The solar system is on its end, winding in a circle, moving forward. That is actually a vortex. So the etheric charge, and this is very interesting, it's the very front and the very back of anything that travels at high speed, which is the coolest. And that's one of the reasons the poles are frozen. I've got Marnie calling me at the moment. If I answer the call, it'll cancel this. So
yeah, I thought she was on. I thought I'd put her on.
Yeah, you need to add it to the
She's
call,
in
I
Florida.
think. Yeah.
Hey, Sean.
Yes.
In the very beginning, you mentioned about the blooms, or not you, but you were asking for me, I think, because I think it was Lisa or somebody else was asking about them.
I don't recall. What do you mean the blooms?
The chem bombs you're talking about?
Oh, yes, yes. Uh-huh.
I think what's going on is I think that they're experimenting with different chemical mixtures. So in other words, every time they spray, you'll have different effects. Sometimes you have the classic trail that blooms out into murky clouds, and other times you'll have like it'll pass and you'll have big, huge blooms of them, or big like spots of them sitting in there rather than a consistent trail. And here's one that 99.9% of all Oregon people out there don't even realize, is that even the classic example of the contrail versus chemtrail, where they show like a picture of the plane leaving a long trail and then there's another one next to it leaving a small trail that's falling apart, that small trail is actually also a chemtrail.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
chemtrail.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Chemtrails.
So
They are
contrails you can't even see.
invincible chemtrails.
Yeah, the contrails you can't actually technically see really well because they don't actually look and resemble the chemtrail at all. Those are totally different things.
Yes, that's true. I'm seeing more and more trails appearing out of nowhere, and there is no plane. And are those chem bombs? What are they?
What they are doing, when I've been to the conferences, some of the reasons for spraying chemtrails is actually controlling the energy in the atmosphere. And this takes us back to CERN Cloud. It's massive for them because I deal in patents, and I can dig patents up that the members of the public can't find going through the intellectual property office. And there are patents out there where they lay particulates in the atmosphere which are conductive, like barium and strontium. And one of the reasons that David Keith wanted to spray acids is that is a key part to electricity and conductivity. Mm-hmm. So what have you got in a battery? Heavy metals, distilled water and acid. Basically they've turned the atmosphere into a battery. Yeah. But here's one of the interesting things. Scientists have now, if normally you have a positive and a negative charge, and all the positives here and all the negatives over here, what they can do now is they can have positive and negative, well, I don't say atoms because I know atoms don't exist, but we'll say that for now. You can have positive and negative flows of energy sitting next to each other. So you don't have to have two opposing potentials. It's one potential all sitting next to each other, contained within itself. Most interesting. So when you see these lines appear and they go out, that's their EMF frequencies controlling the energy in the atmosphere, and you'll see it feather out and then rise up. When they do that, that will start creating low, dark black clouds, which is your deadly orgone fallout. It's partly to do with radiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how do they spray them with no planes now? Why there are, I see more and more appearing these trails and there is no planes inside.
They're much harder to get rid of.
Sorry?
They're much harder to get rid of.
They are. Yeah. They're very dry as well. What I believe it is, they've shoved it in our face. You look at CERN Cloud, they've put tons and tons and tons of material into the Hadron Collider, and they have never cleaned it out once. So tell me where it's all gone. It can be transferred quantumly, even up in the atmosphere. That's exactly what CERN Cloud's experiment was. It was a total enclosed chamber. Now we know we can make energy from matter. Dead easy, just burn coal, fuel, petrol. What they've never been able to do is turn energy back into matter. They've done matter into energy, but never energy back to matter. And what they did on the CERN experiment, they actually transferred energy into that container and created aerosols. How about that? So I believe the feeding of this material into the CERN's Hadron Collider and now into the AWAKE program, which is a room only 30 meters long, that is the most powerful piece of equipment on the planet, and it works quantumly. I believe.
Hey, Harry, Easy Life 21 is asking, does the etheric charge devitalize the contents of the chemtrails, as in the Caribbean we're getting an effect for lung problems for children and black mold?
In short, my answer to that is yes, it can. One reason was because the harmful effects of radiation, through the test done by Wilhelm Reich, it neutralized the radiation, which should have taken hundreds of thousands of years to take place, and that happened within just 2 days. In fact, the rats that he put into the chamber where the radiation was, and with the orgone reaction, suffered no harm whatsoever. That was baffling, absolutely baffling. And the article on this said the elites were crapping themselves because somebody's just demonstrated that radiation can be neutralized within hours. And take that further another 20 years, that means you can neutralize a nuclear bomb as it explodes. Somebody always comes up with an idea, don't they? That was one of the reasons Wilhelm Reich became a threat to the elites.
Also a lot of the ions too, because our bodies are electromagnetic in property. So when we come across a positive ion, which is in the chemtrails, and we're exposed to them, it puts our bodies out of disharmony energetically. And when we're exposed to negative ions, which comes in contact with like orgonite pyramids or orgone cloudbusters or or the crashing of the ocean waves or forests, those are all according to the Schumann resonance and harmonically in balance with our energy. So we get a state of health when we're using fresh water and things of nature, crystals and things like that.
Yeah. Think how many millions and millions of tons of crystals are inside the planet. Amazing.
Yeah.
And they all play their part.
And they're full of the ormus, the orbitally rearranged monatomic elements.
Yep.
Full of the ether.
And what was interesting, I mean, Lenny, you explained once, I mean, this is great piece of information about the Russian pyramid and DNA.
Yes. Yeah, back in, I think it was after the Cold War was over, there was a Russian scientist named Alexander Golod. You could look him up. They had all this money left over from the arms the military-industrial complex. They didn't end up going to war with the United States. So what he did was they took the money and dumped it into studying pyramid technology. And what had happened is they found something very extraordinary, that the actual geometry of the pyramid drew in energy and had some very, very bizarre but healing effects on things they brought inside of it. He built a 144-foot tall pyramid made out of fiberglass, I believe, or I think it was fiberglass, or it was some organic material. And it was more vertical than the traditional Egyptian flatter pyramid. And because of that, they would bring in vegetable seeds inside the pyramid, leave them in there for, say, a week, take them out, throw them in the ground, and the vegetables like popped out like 100 times more growth than the ones that weren't put in the pyramids. They put in granite inside the pyramid, and they left the granite sitting there. They took the granite out, built a prison, and the prisoners that ended up being, going into that prison ended up being a lot more nicer than the prisoners in other places. And the biggest, most astounding thing was they discovered a strange plant growing on the outside of the pyramids that they'd never seen before. So they brought in a botanist, and what he did is he took the plants into a laboratory and studied it, and they found out that the plant species in question was actually extinct for millions and millions of years. It's actually prehistoric. And what they hypothesize is that the geometry of the pyramid would actually draw in information from the Akashic records, where all information that ever has been, ever will be, is stored. And the actual blueprint of life is not in the DNA itself, but in consciousness. So what happened is they think that they took a piece of that layer of the unified field in quantum physics, or Akashic records, or consciousnesses, and they pulled it into form again. And so now we have prehistoric flowers growing around this pyramid because of the energy from the sacred geometry of pulling it out from the ether. And ether brought that in.
I believe that's why...
Still standing.
What's that?
That pyramid is still standing,
Yes.
there.
Yes, it's in Russia, and they actually bring people in as tourists. They can go inside it and take pictures in and out inside of it. It's amazing.
What is called the site?
I'm not quite sure where specifically. You'd have to Google Alexander Golod, Golod, I believe, and pyramid, and it's still standing there. It's extraordinary.
Okay.
So there's different ways that things can pull in ether.